Muscle tissue consists of elongated cells called muscle fibers or myocytes. Remember, cyte means cell, so myo means muscle. So myocytes are muscle cells. These cells use ATP to generate force. Remember, ATP is the fuel that your body uses, just like your car uses gasoline. As a result of using this ATP, muscle tissue produces body movements, helps to maintain posture, and generates heat. So motion, of course, moving around in your environment, walking, of course, is motion. But also there's motion within your body when you swallow your food. That bolus of cheeseburger that you just swallowed has to move throughout your digestive system. So muscular tissue helps that to occur. By maintaining a slight state of contraction, some of your postural muscles help you to remain upright. And then also, as we break down the chemical bonds in that ATP, we release heat. We talked about that when we were talking about the production of ATP and metabolism back in an earlier discussion. So based on its location and characteristics of what it does, muscle tissue can be divided into skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. In a later chapter, we'll discuss more about each of these muscle types, more about the specifics of where they're located and what they do, and you'll also learn the names of several of these muscles. But just looking right now at a brief classification, there are three main types of muscles. Your skeletal muscle is often called voluntary muscle. So this is the muscle that's going to attach to bone and enables you to move. So these are muscles that you contract willingly, such as your biceps brachii in the arm, or your quadriceps muscles in your thighs that allow you to move throughout your environment. These muscles, when you look at them with a microscope, appear striated or striped because of the overlapping bands of contractile proteins that you're going to learn about in great detail later on. So here you see the striped appearance of your skeletal or voluntary muscle. Smooth muscle appears more like a sheet. So your smooth muscle is going to line body cavities and move things throughout the body, such as the muscle that lines your digestive tract and moves that food through after you swallow. But also you find smooth muscle cells that are going to line your blood vessels, and they cause blood vessels to constrict, to get smaller, or to dilate and get larger. And then your cardiac muscle cell is also striated in appearance, somewhat branched, as you can see. It only makes up heart muscle. So this also is involuntary muscle. You can't make these muscles contract, but they do so under regulation of other body structures and actions that keep the heart pumping. There's a special type of structure in your cardiac muscle cell, and these are these little dark lines that you see in your cardiac myocytes or muscles. Those are called intercalated disc, and that's where your cardiac muscle cell meets another cardiac muscle cell, and that's made up of desmosomes and gap junctions. Remember, desmosomes are those little spot welds that hold cells tightly together, and your gap junctions are those holes between cells that allow for the flow of ions. So these two structures together allow the heart muscles to contract as a unit and keep things happening as it should within the heart. So the cells don't pull apart because they're tightly held together with those intercalated discs. We'll look briefly at nervous tissue as well. Later on in the semester, we'll do an in-depth study of nervous tissue. But there are two primary types of cells found in nervous tissue, and those are the neurons. And the neurons are what we commonly think of as nerve cells. So those are the ones that respond to the stimulus. And the neuroglial cells, they don't generate nerve impulses or conduct nerve impulses, but they're the support cells. So most neurons that we're going to see will have a cell body, axons and dendrites, and they carry out the sensory or motor information and perform the integrative or processing functions. The neuroglial cells, again, protect and support the neurons, which are the workhorses in the cell or in the nervous tissue. So as we're looking at a typical image of nervous tissue, Here you can see a great big multipolar neuron. So this enlarged area here is the cell body, also called the soma. Within that you have the nucleus where the DNA is found. You have cytoplasmic extensions coming off called dendrites. Your dendrites are going to receive stimulus or information and bring it into the soma, the cell body, where that information is processed. And then if a nerve impulse is to be generated, it will go down another long cytoplasmic extension known as the axon. So dendrites bring in a stimulus, cell body processes, and then nerve impulse travels down an axon to the next cell. Your neuroglial cells, we'll look at several different types of those. Remember, those are your supporting cells. So they help to maintain the structure of the nervous tissue. Some of them are going to clean away cellular debris, and some of them help to provide a network that keeps the blood vessels and other structures in place, so sort of a framework. Tissue repair is the process that replaces worn out, damaged, or dead cells. Each of the 4 classes of tissues has a different capacity to replenish its cells. If you think about epithelial cells and the tissues made up of epithelial cells, they're constantly undergoing lots of wear and tear. So epithelial tissues tend to be very well replaced. So they're replaced by the division of stem cells or undifferentiated cells, such as the cells that line your digestive tract. Remember, once you put food in your digestive tract, there's friction all along that long tube. So those cells are constantly being sloughed off, and of course they're used a lot, so we have to create new cells to replace those. Same thing with the skin. The cells that are on the outside of your skin are dead cells. Remember, your epithelial tissues, especially in the skin, have a very poor blood supply. So the cells that are farthest away from the blood supply are constantly dying. So those deeper layers of epithelial tissues will undergo a lot of mitosis in creating new cells. Some connective tissues, such as bone, have a continuous capacity to renew because they have a very good blood supply, whereas cartilage doesn't necessarily regenerate as well because it is very or less vascular. So less blood supply means less nutrients, less ATP, less everything that the body needs to create new cells. Same thing with muscle cells. Even though they are highly vascular, muscle cells are not able to have a lot of repair. Nervous tissue has the least capacity for renewal. Now, there are some nerve cells that can create new nervous tissue, but these are typically going to be found in the peripheral part or out in the body, not necessarily in the brain and spinal cord, where we do have very limited regeneration. Again, we'll talk about each one of these systems as we get more into the individual areas of the body. Right now, let's just get the big picture on the tissues themselves. When tissue is replaced with more functional tissue, cells of the same type that are able to do their job, then that tissue or that structure is going to retain its function. However, when regeneration of functional tissue doesn't occur, fibrosis or the formation of scar tissue can occur. Again, there are several things that are going to determine whether functional tissue or scar tissue is formed. But one of the most important things is proper circulation of that tissue. So you've got to be able to get that oxygenated and nutrient-rich blood out to tissues if they are going to create new functional tissues. So 3 factors that can affect tissue repair: nutrition, blood circulation, and aging. As we age, of course, things are going to happen less effectively. I'm sorry, I just hit the record button on there, and I don't know if that stopped or not. So let's just pick back up with this when we're talking about tissue regeneration. Of course, as tissues are going to regenerate, they have to have nutrients. They have to have a blood supply, and the body has to be functioning properly. So overall state of health can affect regeneration of tissues. Aging, of course, causes things to slow down. A lot of times the elderly will not have proper nutrition, and as tissues are not regenerated properly, then that can affect other tissues. So think about the action of the cardiovascular system. If the heart is functioning properly, then blood is being pumped out to body tissues. If your digestive system is functioning properly, then you're resorbing the nutrients and able to take those nutrients out to body tissues. So as long as things are happening as they should, then tissue regeneration will tend to happen as it should. But as we age, all of these processes tend to slow down. So this can cause tissues to not receive the nutrients and the oxygen they need, and thus result in those tissues being replaced with more tough and fibrous tissues, loss of elasticity in blood vessels, stiffening of the joints as the connective tissues tend to harden. So in general, tissues heal faster and leave less obvious scars in the young than in the elderly. In fact, sometimes surgery performed on fetuses leaves no scars at all. The young body's generally in a better nutritional state, its tissues have a better blood supply, and the cells have a higher metabolic rate. So its cells can synthesize or make the necessary materials and divide more quickly. And that's whether it is extracellular material or making new cells. So you sort of get the idea here. As you age, your metabolic processes slow down, and that results in less functional tissue. Looking briefly at homeostatic imbalances of the tissues, disorders of the epithelial tissues are mainly specific to individual organs, such as peptic ulcers, which erode the epithelial lining of the stomach or the small intestines. For this reason, epithelial disorders are typically going to be talked about when we look at individual systems, such as the digestive system. Most prevalent disorders of connective tissues are autoimmune disorders. These are disorders or diseases where antibodies or immune components are going to be created against your own body. So your immune system is seeing your cells as being foreign, and this causes your immune system to attack your body's own tissues. One of the most common autoimmune disorders is rheumatoid arthritis. That's when your immune system starts attacking the synovial membranes of the joints. Because connective tissue is one of the most abundant and widely distributed tissues, a lot of these immune disorders are related to multiple body systems because multiple tissues are affected by that. Some of the common diseases of muscular tissue or nervous tissue we'll look at when we look at those specific tissues later on in the semester.